Um, Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another session in our 2021 Climate Action webinar series. My name is Lori Barlow, AIA, and I'm a member of the AIA's Code Education Subcommittee. As you know, AIA California has developed an in-depth series focused on understanding and implementing the AIA framework for design excellence. This series will run through the end of this year and will feature monthly, hour-long general climate action webinars, as well as 90-minute webinars that dive deeper into technical topics. Additionally, AIA California has partnered with various organizations with like-minded goals to bring bonus content to you in the comfort of your own office, wherever that may find you. As always, all webinar content and additional resources will be available on the AIA California website shortly after each session. A few quick housekeeping reminders before we get started. Today's session qualifies for one AIA HSW learning unit for those watching live, and AIA California staff will report these units for you. The session is also being recorded and will be posted on the AIA California website with additional resources and a PDF of the presentation shortly after the presentation. And as a reminder, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom screen to ask any questions for today's presenters. You can also like a question to move it to the top of the queue. Now, on to today's webinar. It's not just about pipes and cisterns. Compliance with site water disposal requirements represents an opportunity to expand green infrastructure in ways that use plants and pervious surfaces to actually absorb carbon. The expansion of natural features and landscape to remove the hard surfaces is a means of creating more public and private green spaces in our urban landscape to help combat the heat island effect of extensive paving and hard surfaces. I would like to quickly introduce today's presenters before handing things over to them. Mark Kenyon joined Northeast Trees in 2010 as its executive director after a 25-year career in the computer-aided engineering industry, creating physics-based engineering simulation software for the aerospace and automotive industries. He brings not only his management experience to Northeast Trees, but also his engineering perspective and passion for well-designed, low-impact, nature-based solutions to the challenges of the dense, underserved urban communities of Los Angeles. Jamie Chan is a landscape architect designing outdoor places with Northeast Trees, which improve the urban environment by reconnecting the public with nature. She joined Northeast Trees in 2018. She received her Bachelor of Science in Landscape Architect from Cal Poly State Polytechnic University, Pomona. George Balteria joined Northeast Trees in 2014 after a 35-year career in park development and operations at the city of Glendale and the county of Riverside in California. George has extensive experience in leading and managing construction teams in implementing parks and integrated stormwater facilities that include low-impact design as integral components. George also brings his passion for education and mentoring young minds to Northeast Trees' mission to engage, hire, and train at-promise youth on both our urban forestry and park construction teams. Okay, so I'll hand it off now. So take it away, Mark, Jamie, and George.
Thank you very much, Lori. I'm going to now share my screen for our presentation. So if you'll give me just a moment. Let's see there, it looks like it's working. It didn't go. There we go. Thank you, Lori. I much appreciate the invitation to discuss this topic with everyone today. As you'll see, Northeast Trees has some extensive experience dealing with stormwater. Our interest or use cases may be different than those that some of the audience or maybe much of the audience has, so we'll want to discuss a little bit of that. And so without further ado, just talk a little bit about what our objectives today are. So we want to learn a little bit, or at least discuss a little bit about green infrastructure and LID. Jamie's going to come and talk a little bit about the site parameters and other ways that one can use stormwater as a design element. And of course, we're Northeast Trees. We were named because we were founded in Northeast Los Angeles, for those who are curious as to how we got that name. We're not up in Maine, we're here in Los Angeles. And biological, natural-based solutions are really at the heart of our business. So first, I'm just gonna do a quick introduction of Northeast Trees, give some perspective of the way we view the world, and then I'll turn it over to Jamie, and she'll get into the meat of stormwater as a design element. So we're a nonprofit founded a little over 30 years ago here in Los Angeles. Our founder was a gentleman by the name of Scott Wilson. Scott was a retired LASD school teacher. His vision, well, because he was a school teacher, he actually interacted with thousands of young men and women over his school career, introducing them to plants and the value of plants. And so when he retired, he had the interest to continuing to educate both young men and women, as well as the public, on the value of green infrastructure, as well as to specifically plant 5 trees a day till the day he died. And he died about 10 years ago. And I calculated with him that by founding Northeast Trees, he planted at least 10 trees a day. So we're all very fortunate here in Los Angeles. Scott has had an impact on almost every life here in the basin. So to give you some idea, beginning in the 1990s, and just to show you some of the projects that we're most known for, we began work on the Los Angeles River. This is the center section, a little map of the center section, and a few of the parks that we developed. Along that stretch, there are over 6,000 trees, native trees that Northeast Trees planted. Those trees provided shade and eventually the interest from the public to have parks along there, and now a bikeway. So if you've ever been along the Los Angeles River and recreated in that area, you'll be working or probably going past one of our many projects. So that's one area. Those projects, as well as most of what we do, often look like this. So maybe I should go back. We have 3 main interests at Northeast Trees. We're interested in planting trees, we're interested in designing and building parks, and we're interested in doing that work with at-promise or at-risk youth from the communities that we're serving. So usually a project for us would end up looking like this here in Cudahy. They're just, weed infested, underutilized pieces of property. Through our design work and our construction crews, we turn them into something more like this. And so in this case, Cudahy Park is a linear park. We capture all the water that's coming from the hard surfaces from the nearby community, as well as the roads, and we filter it through a biofiltration system and then put it back into the Los Angeles River, which you can see just off to the left there. So why manage and design for stormwater? Well, first, because it's going to become something not only today, but as climate change increases over the future, something that'll be mandatory for us to do, not just because of regulatory reasons, just for the need for increasing our local water resources. So there are various driving forces like climate change, the droughts, the increased droughts that are caused by that. I know that some of you won't be from Los Angeles, but for us, of course, out here in the West, water supply is a big and continuing interest, and much of our history is, the story of water and getting water. We also, because of urban development, we have significant water quality issues, and because of urbanization, fairly large flood control problems within the county and the city. So all of those driving forces have led to a regulatory framework. This will be true really anywhere in the nation, but certainly here in the West. So starting with the Federal Clean Water Act, and then down into the state Clean Water Acts, the various national and local permits, like the MS4 permit for the County of Los Angeles, for our municipal stormwater permit, has led then into stormwater mitigation plans, and now in the last few years, low impact development ordinances. Here in Los Angeles, we have 10 watersheds that are managed, and most of those watersheds, I think 9 of the 10, all have LID ordinances that they have adopted. So in terms of architects designing and building projects, the regulatory framework is likely to be something that you'll, if you haven't already bumped into, something that you will here in the city of Los Angeles. In order to get a building permit, you actually need sign off from the Bureau of Sanitation on the low impact development ordinance process. So again, just to give you some flavor of how we see it here in Los Angeles. So over the last decade, we've been working on bringing together all of the different stormwater and water related issues. And we've got a plan that we call One Water LA. That plan diagrammatically looks like this. The idea would be to, starting with stormwater, capture, infiltrate the stormwater, put it into our groundwater, pump it out for drinking water, capture the wastewater, and then recycle it for use, in areas like our parks and golf courses and cemeteries and various other uses. So this is our concept of One Water. It's intended to manage flood control risk, water supply, and water quality. And so this is just an example for the city of Los Angeles. They have 4 watershed management areas. As I said, there's 10 within the county. These are the areas wherein specifically you would have slightly different potential slightly different regulations for local stormwater infiltration. And then I just wanted to say, though, even though, so most of what architects would be looking at are probably covered by these watershed management plans, but for some projects, flood risk actually is a controlling factor. And so here I just wanted to highlight one particular tool that you might find useful. So there are FEMA flood maps, and so this is an example of the FEMA flood map in the downtown Los Angeles area. But a new tool has been put together. Sorry about that. There goes my coffee machine deciding to turn itself off. The First Street Foundation has built a nationwide parcel level flood map. And so you can see the difference. This is generally the same area. Their analysis is that the flood risk, the existing flood risk is worse than the FEMA actually captures it. And this will likely get more worse over time as climate change comes together. So this may be a new set of regulations that will be coming in future years. So just to give some example, the stormwater mitigation plan for here in Los Angeles requires certain things that I've listed here. Probably the largest one is that we have to make sure that our peak storm post-development does not exceed the pre-development. And so you'll hear words such as an 85th percentile storm that has to be captured, detained, or retained on site, and then released into the stormwater system over time. And then, of course, there's the LID ordinances, which are trying to utilize biofiltration and other best management practices for being able to deal with stormwater that's not nearly as heavy-handed as some of the more engineered solutions might be. So here are some resources that you might refer to help you understand more about both the regulatory conditions and how people are reacting to them. One of the more useful tools for us to use is the Los Angeles County Hydrology Manual and the city and county LID guidelines. And so I'll just give a quick show you just quickly what the hydrology manual. So one of the things that we notice is that and Jamie will get to this, that you're going to need help probably from engineers and from landscape architects to be able to develop significant or better projects. We find it useful to use the hydrology manual and this little stormwater calculator that they have to at least get some sense of the size and the velocity of the flows of our projects, so that we can we can drive that design process and not have it be led by engineers who may just want to put pipes in the ground. And so by having some knowledge of that ourselves, we find that our projects we have more control of our projects. And so finally, I talked a little bit about the regulatory conditions and constraints, but and there were those driving forces, but really these things that we're talking about have other reasons. And our organization as a nonprofit, we're not generally driven by the regulatory constraints. We're generally driven by the desire to want to improve the local environment for the citizens by implementing, green solutions and LID. So, so there may be more than just the regulatory. And so, Jamie, I'm sure we'll talk about that more. And then with that, Jamie, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mark. So stormwater design approaches, there is a range of difficulty of installation and design. And in that case, it is definitely advisable that you engage with a landscape architect or landscape architecture firm early in the design process, depending on the difficulty of implementation. So practices that reduce runoff, on the architectural side, it is about clustering buildings on the site in order to reduce the amount of square footage of hardscape exposed to rain. It could include designing green roofs. It is reducing road lengths and widths, figuring out on a lot of land, if you're doing a campus, for example, which spaces can be used for infiltration and detention and retention. And of course, practices that increase evapotranspiration and infiltration. It is always, on my point of view, very good to plant more trees. Trees by themselves without any human intervention can do a lot, because their canopies slow down the rate of rainfall, reduce erosion, and just reduce flood risk within a property because of what they need by drawing up the water from underground. So again, that is something that does not require a lot of engineering and does not require a lot of cost. Practices that convey runoff from larger rain events. Bioswales and rain gardens are all well and good, but they have an upper limit on size, as I will explain, and you will see from examples. And as you design, you can chain different infiltration and detention, retention basins together across the property. So as one fills up, the overflow will be redirected to another one, and then another one, and another one. So you get vegetated swales that can catch water and redirect them, in slowing down the flow with step pools, check dams, and other above ground visible aspects that can be educational or aesthetically pleasing for the visitors and users of your site. And then the last biggest regional level, highly engineered option are artificial wetlands, restoration, open habitat restoration. Next slide, please. Oh, Mark, next slide, please. So for a green roof, which it's best for stormwater filtering and heat island mitigation. The design, if you wish as an architect to include a green roof, you must come to that decision fairly early in your conceptual design, because the structural engineering will take time, and you will have to account on the design phase for how deep the growing media will be. 6 inches to 1 inch of saturated growing media is heavy. You would have to do research on the different growing media available locally, or installation cost effectiveness, et cetera, and then with the help of a landscape architect or horticulturalist, you will have to determine what is feasible in terms of plant species for your local environment, what can take that exposure and high wind Remember that all plants need water to start off, so you will have to account for costs in terms of starting irrigation. Wind shear must be accounted for. We don't want any lifting up of media or plants and flying down the street. And the waterproof membrane is super important. George has had experience with a past project in which the drainage, the roof drains got clogged, it got backed up, and then leaks started forming on the project. So always be aware of the drains, where they are placed, how they're placed, whether or not they are sized appropriately to the media, and how resistant they are to root intrusion, because plants will find a way. And benefits aesthetically is they can, if you design beforehand to have the site accessible to the users of the building, it can be a very welcome amenity, right up there with rooftop pools, which are becoming quite the thing apparently. And surrounding buildings where people, tenants will be looking out the windows, looking down upon the green roof, it's also a benefit, because studies have shown that looking at a tree for 10 minutes is as calming as having one dose of Xanax, pretty much. Next slide, please. Porous pavement is an option for necessary hardscape on a project. Once again, this has to be researched during your design phase. Pavement types, thicknesses, base course profiles. Installation is not much different in terms of man hours and labor, because it is all about compaction, leveling, choosing of pavement types, and laying it out. However, this is not at all suitable for any slopes, and this requires maintenance, sweeping, vacuuming, because the media underneath the pavers is what is like the sponge, and if it gets clogged, the installation will fail. So you must be clear with the client that proper maintenance after turnover will be must be maintained, or else it will fail. Next slide, please. Rainwater harvesting and reuse. So this system can be sized based on supply area and intended use. The most simple would be at a homeowner's level, where you just go to Home Depot or any other home improvement store, you get a little 50-gallon drum, you put it in your backyard, and then there's a spigot at the bottom for you to use to hand water your backyard garden purposes. And then there are highly engineered systems in which roof collected runoff is used for flushing toilets, is also can be tied into a pump, which can be used to supplement irrigation. Local regulations may prohibit the installation of this at all, because some jurisdictions do not want any restriction on downstream properties which rely on runoff. It may vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and separate non-potable systems must be marked. However, once again, this is not, it doesn't require that much engineering, so to speak, if you're just catching and holding. Now, this is one of Northeast Trees' projects. It's located in California. An 85-acre watershed can hold, this project holds 2 Olympic-sized pools worth of rainwater within 24 hours of a heavy rainstorm. So for this is dry wells. The concrete boxes are open at the bottom where they sit on top of a course of gravel. It is very important to do percolation and soil sampling analysis, because the native soil must be able to absorb that water. Locate this close to the source of the runoff to minimize piping costs, and install a foreblade to prevent clogging from suspended sediments. In this case, also, you have to take into account regular maintenance and cleaning because of street trash that can be flushed into the system. You can also incorporate observation wells to monitor infiltration basin performance, which is very good in terms of gathering data for future design and installation. And this is a very large municipal park sized project, in which on top of these, you cannot plant trees, but you can have a very nice soccer field. So that is doing double duty in terms of recreation for the public and cleaning the water for groundwater. Do not use this in pollution hotspots due to the risk of groundwater contamination. And once again, you can either do these huge galleries that can fit thousands of gallons, or it can be as small as more plastic milk crate looking installations underground. It is fairly flexible in terms of size. Next slide, please. So this is something we are very familiar with as a landscape design build. This is done in Benjamin Franklin Elementary, a schoolyard retrofit located in Glendale, California. Rain gardens and bioswales. Rain gardens are different from bioswales in that rain gardens are a grading proposition. You, instead of a berm or a perfectly level planting area, you make a dish so that the surface rainwater will sit for some time and then slowly infiltrate into the ground. While they are doing that, the plants selected will suck up the water through their roots, along with the trees sucking up the water through the roots, filtering the water. The plants will embody certain particulates inside of their cellular structures, and overflow will go into drains, and then it's all about the retention of water and detention over time. Bioswales are more engineered. They have perforated pipes, gravel underneath, and once again, tied into a conventional drainage system. If you are doing a simple rain garden with no engineering, you must do a perk test so that it is known whether or not the ground can infiltrate within 48 hours to prevent mosquitoes and other disease vectors breeding. And especially in a schoolyard situation, percolation must happen fairly quickly, because you don't want children running through and stomping into the puddles and getting their feet wet. Next slide, please. This is a Northeast Trees. This is a case study. Northeast Trees did work on Ora Street. This is a pilot project that redesigned a residential street and public park to manage stormwater. This is Los Angeles City's first green street. So in the public right-of-way, the sidewalk and streets, it was redone such that stormwater coming off of the street and stormwater coming off of the rain gutters attached to the residential houses were all collected in underground infiltration galleries, where they would be detained, infiltrating underground into the groundwater, and then furthermore redirected to more infiltration galleries within a park immediately adjacent, and then further sunk into the groundwater and filtered and then released directly into the Los Angeles River. We have written up reports where we've tested for contaminants, and the contaminants compared to control were greatly reduced. Next slide, please. So for this, the funding, as you can see, it was across multiple grants from the state. Treatment area is 1 to 5 acres. And this was a multi-department collaboration with the city of Los Angeles in order to make this happen. If you are doing a project that can take runoff from multiple properties, it would be advisable to get into contact with certain nonprofits or firms that are used to collaborating with different jurisdictions and different city or county departments to establish to reduce those permitting slowdowns. Next slide, please. So basically a summary of statistics is that total treated runoff in one storm event, we can collect 53,000 gallons of water to be filtered, infiltrated back into the groundwater and cleaned, and also feeds into the park, which can take advantage of it. The plants can take advantage of it. So that is the data. Next slide, please. So as you can see, the underground infiltration galleries are basically very, very large perforated pipe. And once they're put in, gravel is piled on top, and then the sidewalks were reinstalled. Next slide, please. So this is a Glen Oaks water capture project. This was done by on a city level, and this uses bioswales in conjunction with Torrent Resources, which is a company, dry wells. The dry wells, bioswales go on a horizontal level. The infiltration galleries go horizontally also, as seen from the last project, Garvanza Park. Dry wells are different in that they are a vertical installation. They are open at the bottom, and it's a concrete tube that is installed vertically, which allows for stormwater to infiltrate. This is a fairly good engineered solution in situations in which you cannot open up horizontally due to pre-existing utilities, pre-existing mass transit, or other constraints on site. If you can't go horizontally, you can go vertically. And next slide, please. So as you can see, 4 dry wells were able to handle a treatment area of 300 acres. And they capture 9.3 million gallons of water, which is quite the amount. As you can see, you can do a little, and then it accomplishes a lot when it comes to stormwater retention. Next slide, please. So the pre-existing conditions, hazardous straight flooding causes accidents and contamination, like the stormwater drains can be backed up and it causes waste, runoff from, cars, so on and so forth. So installation is fairly straightforward for the bioswales. You take an existing street, break up the concrete. Next slide, please. You dig down, excavation depth 5 feet. Of course, this is after the percolation tests, soils profiles tests for the engineers to determine best depth for infiltration. And you backfill with gravel. And next slide, please. And then we have the drains that can intercept the stormwater off of the street. Next picture is the drywall drilling depth. It was 50 feet in this instance. Next slide, please. And as you can see, we have the concrete sidewalls being installed with construction personnel for a sense of scale. In the drywall interior, you can see there is a monitoring device. So if it does become backed up, you can have monitoring systems in place for emergencies and notification of needing for additional maintenance, emergency maintenance, things like that. Next slide, please. So as you see, they install the dry well, and there is a opening in the curb capturing the stormwater. The bioswales capture stormwater as well. They get filtered through the plant media and then sinking down the 5 feet of gravel backfill and then infiltrating further into the groundwater. Next slide, please. And that is the end of the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you, Jamie. We do have a few questions in our Q&A.
Yes.
First, are you familiar with how the Bauhaus handled stormwater and breakwater elements?
So Jamie, I was Googling while Jamie was talking, but no, I'm not. And unfortunately, our other colleague, George, has had some sort of communication issue, so he's not able to join the call. Jamie, are you familiar with this project?
The Bauhaus style? No, I am not. I believe that stormwater is not necessarily part of the curriculum of very many architectural schools, and that they passed it on to engineers to do the conventional, which is rain gutters, shush it away, you know, down the storm drains as quickly and neatly as possible with the short runs. There are options there, like in a modern sense, there are options where drain spouts, as seen at the very beginning, there was a project done in Portland, Oregon, in which the downspouts, instead of being immediately tied into the stormwater system, the water was surfaced into these sculptures, which formed waterfall, water fountain sorts of installations prior to being infiltrated.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I think that
sorry, Mark.
project is I believe that project's in Germany, Jamie, if from what quick I could Google. And my guess is, though I don't know much about the project, my guess is that they do have, so let me just describe like any particular system might have 3 components. So usually there's something that's called the forebay. So you're trying to collect the trash and other large contaminants that might get into one of these systems. And then you have some sort of treatment train. And as Jamie was sort of describing, that might be bioswales, rain gardens, dry wells, and other, sometimes even quite small devices that capture, slow down trees, as Jamie said, are an amazing tool. And my guess is that the Bauhaus must use a similar sort of system. And then finally, the third component is usually at the very end, the water, you know, if it's just being detained, has to be released into the storm, you know, into the normal stormwater system, whatever that happens to be. And so usually, depending on the volumes and the flow velocities, you can sometimes have one of these, as Jamie was showing, a very large dry well that sort of can suck up and hold and contain whatever the size of the design storm is for a particular project. And my guess is they have that. I also noticed that they were potentially implementing green roofs and green walls. And so Jamie talked a little bit about the green roofs, and a green wall is intended to be a wall against a building, oftentimes be similar to a rain garden where you're using, maybe you put in drought tolerant plants, and so you're using the stormwater to irrigate after the plants have been established. And then by having the plants near a wall, you end up shading the wall, which then decreases the need for air conditioning in the summertime, which then can reduce the carbon footprint of that building. So that's what I can say about that, which I don't think I'm answering the question, but that's the best I could do.
Wonderful, thank you. Another question we have is, what is the role of the geotechnical engineer in these infiltration projects, such as the vertical dry wells?
Okay, so the geotechnical engineer will give you a soils profile For example, clay will not infiltrate very quickly at all. And sometimes clay is almost like a plug that prevents infiltration at all. And you want to know whether or not the native soil can infiltrate as quickly as needed for a large storm event. And then sometimes there is a layer of clay, and then immediately underneath, depending on the soil profile, there's less clay soil. There's loamy soil, sandy soil, a combination. So sometimes all you need to do is to punch through that layer into the layer of soil that can soak up that water. You cannot tell from site to site what you are going to get. However, over time, you will get an idea of where is that hard pan, where is that clay. And in some sites, you have to account for a greater amount of labor. For example, I understand that in some areas of this country, there is a layer of like, what was it? Loess, like glacial rocks that have been formed. They're a lot like cobblestones, and as you dig, you're bumping into those stones, which takes longer to remove. So you want to account for how deep you need to excavate per the geotechnical recommendation to get to that layer that you can infiltrate. If you stop at the clay level, you're forming a bathtub, and it defeats the purpose of these engineered solutions.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is, as I'm sure architects know, the planning and pre-planning and having experts on your team is saves cost in the long run. So you do want to have people that have some experience. You might want to interview more than one firm, in order to get that. But certainly geotech is one of the most important parts. We here in Los Angeles, just even within one site, we've had bioswales that two or three of them were perfectly fine, and one that was literally 10 feet away was had a complete clay layer underneath it and didn't infiltrate. And unfortunately, we didn't catch it on our geotech, and so then the cost of retrofitting that bioswale was much more expensive in the long run.
Great. Here's another question. Can you repeat who prepared the forecasted increase in flood zones?
Yeah, that's done by a Boston firm, First Street Foundation. Actually, I'll go back to that slide. Right here. So First Street Foundation, they have this parcel map across the United States that models flood control, including over the next 30 years, I believe, if I remember right. So it's a useful tool for if you either own property or where development is looking to in the future. It'd be an area for it provides information that I think is useful to trying to deal with stormwater, particularly as climate change gets worse. We're likely to have more or less frequent rainstorms, but with larger volumes. So that's where that comes from.
Wonderful. Is GAR, green area ratio, an approach used in the LA area to assist with assimilating water into the soil? GAR is an urban site sustainability metric used in Berlin GDR since 1997 and Washington, D.C. a bit later.
Yeah, that's not a measure that we use out here. Our soils and the different watersheds. So there are other things we haven't mentioned. So we have a number of different groundwater basins. Some of them are highly polluted. And so, and we also have in some of our basins, the groundwater level is too close to the surface to infiltrate. And so out here anyway, sort of a general metric doesn't seem to have been adopted. It really is more guidelines and some of the regulations in our LID ordinances, and then the engineering or the geotech tells us specifically on a particular project, on a project by project basis.
And then Jamie, I think you touched on it, but how was Garvin Park paid for?
I believe Garvanza Park was a combination of city funds and grants that Northeast Trees obtained from the state of California. We Northeast Trees, a lot of our projects are done by obtaining cap and trade funding. California does cap and trade funds, and the funds are then distributed to different agencies in California, and nonprofits and municipal entities can apply for those funds by writing grant proposals. And we win these grants by explaining the location, why we should have those funds, and how we're going to use those funds for capturing stormwater, doing mitigation projects, or for example, CAL FIRE. CAL FIRE wants to plant trees to offset the trees that get burned during our wildfire season in an urban context. So we are doing a maybe 2-to-1 or even 1-to-1 replacement in some cases for trees, and it supplements the CAL FIRE goal, and it allows us to do these projects.
Great. Here's a good question. I am working on a parks project in Northridge with drought-stressed trees and lots of dead grass. I suggested adding stormwater capture and am getting pushback that there is not enough rain in the summer months to make it worthwhile. What can I say as a response?
That's actually a good one.
Yeah,
Jimmy?
it is not about the water that you are not able to capture during the summer. It is about the water you can capture during the winter, which then you can bank underground, replenishing the groundwater such that the mature trees, which have roots, but you have to picture that trees underground are going down as deeply as they are tall above ground. So you want to say those trees have roots that are, if you got a 50-foot tree above ground, you've got 50 feet of roots below ground. And you want to say that if you capture as much stormwater as possible during the wet months, it will tide them over during the dry months. And also you can say that it can also improve the park aesthetically to have plants healthy and able to stand those periods where maybe you have to turn off your regular irrigation system and they're going to go brown and dormant. But if you have that groundwater available, if you have supplementary reservoirs of water that you can pump up from a cistern to water during the drought that does not come from the municipal water system, it would be more cost effective. You are reducing maintenance in terms of replacing dead plants by having the plants that exist on site surviving because of supplemental water.
Yeah, and I would only say that, since Northridge is here in California, at least I assume it is, I would just, that the questioner can certainly send me an email and we'll try to help on that. So we're fighting that battle all the time, and have developed a number of different systems that have been put into at least Los Angeles Recreation and Parks facilities. Sometimes one of the keys to getting the project to move forward is getting the stormwater component to be managed by the Bureau of Sanitation here in Los Angeles. And so those two parts of the city have collaborated on a number of projects. And so that might be another way to, and certainly, even during the, we're still in our drought, and even during the drought, the governor of California made it known to all that, supplementing water during the drought for trees is worth the investment of that water, even though in Southern California, we have to import that water because the benefits that the trees bring back in many forms. We mentioned a couple: stormwater, carbon sequestration, mental health, is far outweighs the cost of keeping those trees alive. And then trying to replant trees that have died because we didn't get them, we didn't get them through the drought is really sort of penny wise and pound foolish. So we'd love to talk to you more about that.
I can connect you guys after the webinar. Okay, here's another question. How is structural surcharge from the streets handled by the adjacent 5-foot deep gravel filled bioswale?
So I don't know which project, maybe it was the Glen Oaks one. So in any case, in all of these projects, part of the engineering is to calculate the structural surcharge. Usually for us, the street ones I've never seen those, at least personally, being a problem. The ones where we've seen that as an issue is when we try to infiltrate water behind the Los Angeles River concrete walls, and there the Army Corps has very specific surcharge amounts, and sometimes we have to deal with that. Usually the solution ends up being not allowing as much water, or in this case maybe as much gravel to be put behind the area if it can't be structurally reinforced or in some other way dealt with.
Great. In pervious paving, you mentioned it needs maintenance like vacuuming. Is the spaces between the pavers that need to be cleaned, or is it the media beneath that needs to be vacuumed?
It's the spaces between the pavers that need to be cleaned, or in the case of certain asphalt or concrete mixes that are pervious, you would have to vacuum the surface overall to keep it small particulate, clogging particulate free, which again, from a design standpoint, you have to account for that. Like I wouldn't want to design a permeable pavement area immediately adjacent to, like, say, a kid's playground with the sand pits, and the kids are going to be tracking back and forth, or like a beach boardwalk. You would just not do that at all. Permeable paving would be perfectly fine in, like, say, a hotel courtyard where there would not be a lot of incoming dirt, so to speak.
Great. Can these measures reduce agency stormwater fee impacts?
That's actually a good question. I don't know the answer to that. If I would guess that if one were to add, be able to sequester more than a particular project was statutorily required, that maybe it might, but I don't know the answer to that.
I do not know that either. I do know that going above and beyond the requirements of code is not necessarily rewarded. However, every little bit helps. And what we are doing instead of, say, like just merely having a cistern, just merely having a dry well, by planting trees and doing bioswales and rain gardens and designing creative infiltration structures at downspouts, it differentiates your project. It gives you an amenity, an opportunity to have an outdoor amenity that other projects do not necessarily have, which would make your particular project perhaps more desirable to clients. It would possibly make your project stand out to developers that are going after a higher end clientele. It can make an institution stand out. Also in Arizona, 10 Ike landscape architects were used for a Arizona campus where they used condensate from the air conditioning systems, which run pretty much 24/7 in Arizona. They caught that water condensate from those necessary systems and then reused them for their irrigation, which meant that the campus trees are greener and more drought tolerant than usual in Arizona, and therefore the entire campus with its mature canopy of trees is then more desirable a campus. So the capturing of air conditioner condensate is not something we've ever done, but it is also an interesting avenue that architects may also consider. where the sweat of the buildings, you know,
Yeah, and Jamie, I would only add,
waters everything else.
yeah, exactly. I would only add that, you know, we find that the Regional Water Board here in Los Angeles, as well as the Los Angeles City Bureau of Sanitation, their staffs are very helpful. For example, one area that I know that they're very much interested in, but it's difficult to do, is to take stormwater off of the adjacent streets, and then in the kinds of projects that we do, we run them then into a park, but like at a school, nobody wants to bring that water onto a school, and it may be that other private projects could get some sort of reduction in their fee, by working with either the water board or with with sanitation. It's worth exploring. And as I say, even our small little nonprofit has had very good luck working with those organizations.
Wonderful. Okay, we have just a few more questions. In snow country, road salt is a nemesis. What is the main stormwater contaminant you must deal with, or is it contaminated soils and aquifers?
Well, so yeah, that's actually a great question. No, usually, so most water bodies in Los Angeles County are impaired by either trash, bacteria, nitrates from like fertilizers, and or heavy metals and these things. And so some of these are soluble in the water and some are, not. And so these 4 bays that I talked about are designed in such a way to try to deal with that. And I had no experience with salt, but that's actually one that I think, somebody must be thinking about it. And and that's something I'll add to pass on to our team. We don't do projects in the snow area generally, though we are looking to try to take at-risk youth from the Los Angeles area up into the Sierra and doing some of these types of projects in the Owens Valley. So maybe something we'll have to learn how to do.
Great. What happens in areas where the Regional Water Quality Board has ongoing environmental groundwater mitigation? For example, near JPL, areas of Burbank, etc.
Yeah, as far as I know, at least in the projects we've been doing, the volumes that we've talked about infiltrating haven't been a problem. So they've allowed us to continue to infiltrate in those areas, say in the valley where they have a large compromised groundwater basin. But of course, we're not allowed yet to pump out of those. So again, it might be depending on who the exactly the agency that's managing that basin. Maybe it's different, say up at the JPL area, but I do know projects near JPL have been capturing and trying to infiltrate water. So we're probably allowed to put water into those basins, just not take it out, would be my guess.
Great. And I have one more question for you. How will future climate change impact the systems we design and install today?
Well, that's a good question. So just generally, well, first off, it'll be very regional. Each region is going to be impacted somewhat different. But here in California, our expectation is that we're going to get fewer rain events, but with more intensity. So we should be designing our projects, well, right now, regulatory-wise, probably what will happen is that whatever measures we're doing now probably will be overwhelmed. Usually a system is constrained either by the volume of water and you're required to hold it for a 24-hour period. But if that water goes up, or if the 85th percentile storm, becomes, instead of many fewer storms, is now fewer but bigger storms, my expectation would be that the systems we're designing today are likely to be not compatible in the future, and that we'll likely see further regulatory change over time.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm actually going to pass it back to Lori for a few closing remarks.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, Lori, you're still muted.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, I would. Okay, I want to give a big thank you to Mark and Jamie for the excellent presentation. If you have made it this far, AIA California staff will submit for you the AIA CE credit, and it should appear on your transcript in a few weeks. As always, More resources and tools can be found on the AIA California's website, which is www.aiacalifornia.org/climate-action. More details on the 2021 Climate Action webinar series will be shared with you by email. Thank you again for joining us today, and we'll see you at our next Climate Action webinar.
Thank you, everyone.